project just finished.
Was that 25 years?
It would have been, yeah. No split ends.
No split ends.
The Achilles tendon is fine since I saw you last. Let's see. I bruised these. No, I had a broken heart. I had a Robbie. Yeah, I have a it's called a bicuspid valve. It's genetic. I knew about it 10, 12 years, and so I was running some stairs. Became the conclusion that something's not right. I got to carry someone. They're going to die. Yes. Well, about 3% of the population has it.
3%?
It's my kids' fault. Yeah. I got another.
So good?
Oh, yeah. They just.
Hell, man. Remember this from there?
I do.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay,
buddy?
My wife, Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. Nice to meet you. I'm great. Sometimes they call me.
You remember Dale?
Oh, yeah.
Dale, how you been, bud?
I'm staying sane, and you?
I like your haircut, buddy.
That's all I can do. Best of you. You shaving shower today?
Oh, not the show. No, I don't know the show.
Shaving shower.
It's a fall. Be a lot easier.
Shaving. Spanking white.
It's not lately. Since I had my last knee replacement, my wife had a cardiac arrest. She's 19 February. She she's in rehab now. Put her there Thursday night. Innovation or something. There's a ventilator out. 6-7 days ago. Not really. She's getting better all the time. Diabetes exacerbated by aging more and Parkinson's disease and pain.
Internal problems. Saving this?
No. I'll even let no gray hair sit there.
Yeah, I have some the key word being hair right in there.
They didn't.
You finally quit working?
Yeah.
Me too. It's working? Yeah. I don't think so. I'm done with it. I'm done. Oh boy.
You remember this? Yeah. Where is she? She had cardiac arrest in 19th February. We just moved into a rehab place called PAM. He was in PAM Thursday night.
So that
Cardiac arrest. Her heart was just stopped pumping, and she just in a chair with this quick and her hands like this. And she just hit my leg. I looked at her, and she was gone, passed out. She shook out on the floor, started doing chins on the got there within 5 minutes. irony. My grandson was a firefighter. He was the first
You place good for the world.
She was on the ventilation for 2 weeks. Tulsa about 4 months. Today's well, she's doing 100 times better than she was. I wouldn't say good. Hey, Grady.
Slide over. Hey, Grady.
Squeeze one more in.
Oh, yeah, we get your big old buddy. All right.
She is. You have an extra prayer in your repertoire prayers? Yes, throw them out there. Tell Donna to. She doing good?
He's still working. Teaching me I can't remember to give you out. He's got students. Literally all over the world.
I'm petty.
How do you find it?
I didn't think this place could make me
Yeah, this is really got low voice. I knew it was a pretty good sign, but you're right. There would be a lot of people.
No, I work with his daughter. But we've been friends. Yeah.
72. He's probably a year or two old. You're an older guy.
I'm only 76. I'm only 79. You got all time. We are at it.
Buddy, look good.
He's only 68.
Go ahead and cut it off. Shave it off like food out.
Just a tad. It's like those Dave Robertson. He's got all kinds of hair.
Yeah, he's got pretty thin.
Just a nuisance anyway.
I'm a year older. I'm a year older than him.
Are you?
You're young. You remember those days. You were probably like in elementary school. No, you were probably even.
I will go ahead to the water. I'll twinkle my dad's eye. You're going to be back there?
Twinkling your dad's eye.
Probably the thickest thing.
Well, certainly. I'm just glad to see Carl's out.
Oh, working, yeah. Gary and I went over to see him at his house.
Very good.
Once he got home, yeah. He's doing okay. He's got a long way to go. He's walking around, barely walking around. COVID?
Yes.
He had COVID. Hey, Ray. He was on the gym. What's up, bro?
Every day better.
Yeah, we moved into a rehab.
Last time I saw him, when he was at the lunches.
Carl? Yeah. I'm talking about Ollie's or the other one?
Ollie's?
Yeah. You wouldn't? We've played golf He's not as skinny.
Oh, yeah.
Nickel, Susan, Tina, she said.
Gary was in first. Big Red One.
Yeah, Carlos. Buddy, good to see you.
my high school buddy. He was a big red one over. I was just turned his even three. It's been a while.
I was loud.
But unfortunately, everybody brought home a little bit of orange juice.
I have no clue.
Definitely a contributing factor.
Looking at
I'm looking for Ken Miller.
Over there.
Here he
Next
is.
row.
I oh, he stood up. Yep, he just stood up.
yes.
Expect you.
I agree. He said, back of the head, all I had was.
Hey, big bro.
What's this?
Okay. And look at these guys.
We're all in a row. We're older. I'll put them behind you.
The old guys. Okay. They keep sending me back to the room. And
I sure do. Good to see you, sir. Better not deserve, I can tell you that. How are you?
Wouldn't mind having a drink of whiskey.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I'm a whiskey guy.
My wife.
Yep. That was the evaluation. I would have given you back. I got a percentage. So I need to give somebody back.
I'm more of a Scott guy.
Yeah, that is Scotch.
I'm a Jack man. Jack Daniel.
I'm a Crown Royal, man.
That's too smooth. That's too smooth. I need something that slaps me back.
You all need some words.
No, I don't drink. Nice tea. There's Bob Meyer.
Sure is. Where?
Walking down the aisle right there.
In that white shirt?
Yeah, that's Bob Meyer. How's that?
I would have never recognized him. We lived when he was in the front of the
It's the same. Meyer looks the same. Well, now that I can see his face, it's pretty good. I know, I used to ride with him.
He took care of me.
Well, thank goodness he didn't have to take care of me. I could have taken care of him. Oh, I did some crazy stuff. Graveyard. He was even a sergeant, too. How long were you in the honor guard? 4 or 5 years? 80 to 89. Okay. All on top. You know they're letting the top guys come back and see that. Chris Wood, because you've got Mark Secret, he retired. He's going. Just plenty of guys. Well, I can't get enough guys, taxi guys that want to do it. Really? Yeah. Used to. Kenzie. No, I had no, I'm tired. I see
No. What you doing, bud?
Not much. Who's this guy here? I see him everywhere I go.
He's hiding. Hey, Don. How you, buddy?
How you guys doing?
I hadn't seen you in days.
We all fucking play golf on Tuesday.
It's Thursday.
There are no parking places out there. A lot of people not going to be able to get out. So you do. I'm going to stand.
What else going on? She said, well, we're not moving for that.
Did you get my reply? Okay. I can't see it. How you doing?
Tell him I said my love. Tell him my disco chat.
Did you find out? I had to park across the street.
I can see Bernie George, Luxie here, Nemo.
Well, I came around because I wasn't anything. Just like this.
Pretty fair in yourself.
All right. That's it.
Hey, Chuck. How you doing, buddy?
All right.
He's got the golf.
A lot of old guys here. I know.
I remember when he came back.
I said, I'm trying to get to know you every time I turn around. He's taking care of the grandkids.
Two different.
They didn't have enough there to move
Yeah, they sold lots real good.
Yeah.
And now they're looking for something else. Meantime, we're having meetings at the Mondays.
So they go, are they going to build a new building?
They're looking for something that they can just refurbish. But if they have to, they'll do it. But they're looking for something big enough lot. You know, 3-4 acres, something like that. You know,
And I didn't know.
kind of spread out, big parking lot. Big enough that they can have a function. So it's kind of what they're
You're going to be out at the requalification in April.
I am indeed.
Yeah, I'll see you out there.
All right.
I sent him an email the other day. And I don't know if that's it, because my mom, she does. I finally sent him one the other day. She said, yeah, I'll try to go there.
Well, I always do the first day in case something goes wrong in the west. I can come back with bad weather or something like that. I still got another day. You know, otherwise you gotta get on Craig Roberts and go out there and, you know, have him do it. Send the letter to the academy. Last time I tried that, it didn't work out so good.
He told me to slide over into that area. Maybe there'll be some seats left over after they get the family in
You
here.
never know.
Yeah.
There's something up way up front.
No, I never, I didn't, after I got out of the Oklahoma, and then I started to realize he is. And that lasted for about 2 years. Which was a great well, with kids robbery, this guy right here is a homicide.
The minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king of roses.
Ready? Right. Ready? Set.
Your faith is strong, but you need proof. You saw the living wonder, the beauty in the light. Hallelujah. She tied you to the kitchen chair. She broke your throat and she cut your hair. And from your lips she drew the hallelujah.
Who's a year younger than me?
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon McCombs, and it is my honor to be here today to celebrate the life of David Eugene Roberts. So Dave had many names that he went by depending on where you knew him from, whether it was Dave or D.E., Grandpa Dave, Dad, my personal favorite, the Hawk. See, David was, well, you might say he was a badass. You did say that, many of you, as I talked with you. But he was a softie, and he had a heart. See, Dave was the type of man that if there was a need, he was there. On behalf of the family, we'd like to thank you for seeing a need today, to be here, to celebrate his life, because of who Dave was and who Dave continues to be in all of our lives. Today we celebrate a life that gave, that taught, and that will continue for all the years of our life. So let's start with a word of prayer. God, we thank you for being the author of life. We thank you for being the taker. And though, God, we thank you for that, it weighs on our hearts when those moments come and those loved ones go before us. But your word tells us that in our days and time of trouble, we may call upon you and you will deliver us. And and then we will give you praise. So God, we do that today. We thank you for a life, God, that taught us to love. It taught us how to enjoy the moments. It taught us how to work. God, it taught us how to give. And God, may we continue to honor Dave by how we live our life from this day forward. God, it's our desire today that everything we say, everything we do here, God, may it be for you and in you. So God, we ask today that this family and these friends, that you bring comfort that surpass all understanding. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'd like to introduce to you Lowell Sprague, and Lowell will come. And today, as he's coming, you're going to hear all about Dave's life from many of his close friends and his family.
David Eugene Roberts was born April 23rd, 1947 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He is survived by his wife Colleen and children Audrey Hamad, Jennifer Arnold, Holly Rutledge, and Kyle Roberts. He is also survived by his grandchildren Crystal Long, Blake Moore, Kiefer Arnold, Jensen Arnold, and Jace Arnold, as well as his sister Hope Roberts and brother Joe Ragsdale. He is predeceased by his parents, Joe and Sarah Ragsdale, his wife Lucy Roberts, and grandson Jared Roberts. David graduated from Stillwell High School in 1967 and immediately enlisted in the Army. As occurred throughout Dave's life, his leadership and dedication was recognized by his superior officers, and he was chosen for flight school to become a helicopter pilot. Dave served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, often taking fire from the ground as he flew his missions. As with most combat veterans, Dave rarely spoke of his time in combat. He was a highly decorated soldier, including an Air Medal for heroism with valor. Dave's military service continued with the Army National Guard upon his return to the States. Once home, he served 7 years as a police officer for the Tulsa Police Department, achieving the rank of corporal and obtaining his bachelor's degree from Northeast University while working full-time. He left the Tulsa Police Department and became an agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and, no surprise, rose to the rank of resident agent in charge of the Tulsa office. Upon retirement from ATF, Dave became the director of the Marshal Service for the Cherokee Nation. Dave took the Marshal Service from a 5-man operation to a modern, well-trained law enforcement branch for the 7,000 square mile Cherokee Nation. Dave's last assignment was as Vice President of Security for Cherokee Nation Enterprises. He oversaw security for all the casinos and businesses, having set up the extensive security and surveillance that exists in all the casinos. Dave's battles weren't over. As a result of Agent Orange's exposure in Vietnam, he had a quadruple bypass and diabetes. In 2013, he lost his vision, and in 2018, Parkinson's entered his body. Like the hero he was, he fought these diseases until his body could fight no more. Dave's battle ended peacefully in his home with family beside him. Dave loved his family, friends, dogs, guns, OU football, and New York Yankees baseball. I am honored to be here today to speak about my friend, Dave Roberts. No one had a greater influence on my career in law enforcement. He taught me everything I needed to know to be successful. Dave was my training officer at the Tulsa Police Department and later at ATF. He taught me that being prepared was not just about the equipment used, but also about having the proper mindset. He was known throughout his career for being a cop's cop. Fresh out of the academy, while we were on patrol, I would ride and Dave would drive. Dave, nicknamed Hawk for his keen sense of observation, would ask me questions. For example, how many violations do you see on that motorcycle? I hadn't even paid attention to the motorcycle. No less than 6, he said. This is your stop. I'll wait in the car. I got out and talked to the motorcyclist and then sent him on his way. When I got back to the car, Dave asked, how many tickets did you write? I said, none. That guy's having a very bad day. He was on his way to see his mother in the hospital. That morning, his motorcycle fell over and broke off all the mirrors. He had just gotten fired from his job and he was too broke to renew his tag. You get the idea. So did Dave. Dave was furious and threw his hat on the dashboard. He told me, every person you stop has an excuse, and if you don't quickly understand that, you will never write a single ticket in your career. I thought, so this is his method of training. He is going to let me fail and then chew my butt out loyal. Later we stopped another vehicle, and Dave said again, I'll wait in the car. As I approached the vehicle, the driver stepped out and I saw Dave also get out of our unit. He had recognized the driver as a multi-convicted felon he was very familiar with. The driver also recognized Dave and immediately put his hands on his collar. He said, hello, Mr. Roberts. So you see, Dave was respected by fellow officers and citizens alike, even those he had once arrested. Dave also helped pave my way from Secret Service to ATF. Other agents often told me how lucky I was because I worked in the Dallas Field Division that had the best ATF leadership in the country, and Dave was part of that leadership. Dave was a natural leader with uncompromised principles who approached adversity and conflict head-on. He clashed at times with his supervisors, but always held strong to his convictions, sometimes at his own expense. He simply stood his ground, come what may. In the early 90s, Dave was promoted to the position of resident agent in charge of the Tulsa ATF office. Dave oversaw the 1997 investigation of 2 January bombings targeting the Tulsa abortion clinic. Dave coordinated this joint investigation with the FBI, and on February 6th, a 15-year-old juvenile was arrested. On March 11th, the juvenile pled guilty to 5 federal counts tied to these bombings. For this investigation, Dave fought hard with ATF headquarters to bring in the newly trained Forward Observer team, which proved critical in the initial stages of this investigation. This was the first time the team had ever been called out, and it was typical of Dave to be progressive and forward-thinking by utilizing newly available law enforcement resources and strategies. Dave took part in so much of this country's history: the Vietnam War, the siege at Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, and his leadership contributed greatly to the growth and modernization of the Cherokee Marshals. Dave dedicated his life to serving our country, and he has left it a better place. May God bless him. In our profession, the biggest compliment you can pay anyone is I would go through the door with him anytime. Dave Roberts is deserving of that tribute. He has gone through the final door, and I'd like to think of him there, waiting on the other side for his comrades in arms to come through. Rest in peace, my brother. I will miss your friendship, as will all those who also knew you well. You will live on in our hearts and memories. I'd like to close with the Bible verse. Well done, good and faithful servant. A righteous man will be remembered forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Lowell. I'd like to introduce to you Charlie Soap from Cherokee Nation.
Morning or afternoon, whatever it is. Sometimes I get lost which is morning or afternoon or what. So and God always the only last day to say hi to everybody. There's already been a lot of things that's been said about my friend David, relatives, and so I'll just have to do what I had prepared my speech for. So I'll repeat a couple of things that's been repeated earlier. So anyway, just bear with me. I'll make mine as short as I can. And so when you see people taking notes out of their pockets and things like that, you say, here we go. It's going to be a long speech. But I forget easily, so I have to write notes down for myself. But anyway, I'm going to read what Chief Hoskin, Cherokee Nation, wrote about Dave. And just so eloquently written, I just need to repeat it. And so I was sitting in the office the other day and saying, okay, what do I say about David? There's so much to say about him. And I'd write something up and I'd throw it away. I'd think back and I wrote 2 or 3 days. So that later I'd come back and then I saw this written statement about David Roberts from the Chief of the Cherokee Nation. So I want to read that to you. So it said, we are saddened to learn of the passing of David Roberts, a Cherokee citizen who committed his professional career to provide safety and security for the most vulnerable among us. He led our Cherokee Nation Marshal Services and was a former Vice President of Security, Surveillance, and Loss Prevention with Cherokee Nation businesses. Under his astute leadership from 2000 to 2004, the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service grew from a humble 5-person department into one of the most respected law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma and across Indian country. We are forever indebted to his vision and leadership as he helped the sovereign government develop the ability to better protect citizens and enforce the laws within a 7,000 square miles reservation. David, who was a U.S. Army pilot and Vietnam War veteran, also served as a Tulsa police officer and agent in charge for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Tulsa Field Office, we are thankful for the service to our country and the Cherokee Nation. Our thoughts and our prayers with the Roberts family. So, but I remember going back in high school days, David was a slim guy, you know, and you would think that he was pretty shy, but his personality overcame a lot of that. And after I left high school, I went to the Navy for 4 years and came back and not thinking anything about some of the people that had left in high school. And one day, Wilma Mankiller and I were married then, and she came back and said, Charlie, do you know Dave Roberts? I said, yes, I do. I said, I went to school with him. He said, we just hired him as the head of the Marshal Service for the Cherokee Nation. And so I said, that's great. He's a good man, and he'll do a good job. And so Wilma invited him over for dinner one time, and I talked to him about Dave. We'd go ride horses and things like that. And so Wilma said, I'm going to invite Dave over for dinner. I said, that would be fun. That would be good. I'd like to talk. I'd like to see more David. So he came over. Wilma cooked a steak, and we set a table. And Wilma's favorite color was pink. And so she bought these pink forks and knives and everything. And so we set the table, and she said, David, go ahead and start eating. Dig in. So David takes that knife and they put that knife. You have to know David. You know David is a big, powerful, strong guy, you know. And so he pressed down that steak knife into the steak, and that knife broke. He looked at me, and I put my head down. Grandma said, "Oh, don't worry about that, Dave." She said, "Those are cheap Walmart forks and spoons, so just go ahead and eat." So he got another. We had a good meal. And but I visited him at his home several times. We had a great time. He's just an easygoing guy. He needs to be around. And I can't rightly talk about most of some of the things that he went through in life, but from what I heard bits and pieces about his service in the military, he's got quite a bit of heroic military record and a lot of respect for him. And so it's just really great visiting with him. And so anyway, he certainly was a patriot and a Cherokee warrior according to our people. So but I just want to say thank you, Dave, Colleen, for protecting our communities and families and our country. And you did an outstanding job along with your team of marshals and other law enforcement agencies. And thank you for demonstrating what a leader should be, plus an example of what a husband and a father and a friend should be. So I thank you for that, David, for being a friend and being so proud of being part of the Cherokee Nation. We just want to say thank you to the family and everything. Thank you for honoring us to be speaking here. So let's just have a word of prayer, and I'll say this in a Cherokee language. Skjånesarna då till landet hos det hela konserhet och det dagliga sahne. Skjåna åsarna Dave Roberts sidan även God och justere och då det jag att ni säger då hisoptarna stannar skjåna. Sen och kan ta hen och då var ju så Dave det då så är det ju stats nå här då så var den dagliga sig och det hela går det går till Skjåna Osto, Ogeyela, Senam, the God, Ojigoti, have Dave, Dr. Nito, Heskin, and Aleskina, Luzus, and Nidon, and Donis, Dr. Neskina, go back 6 times, also like him. Now, so see down there, he goes a stairs, Osto Gay up to Naga, Osto Sakan, Don testing. God knows the line. Each of you, Jesus, and you, Jesus, Father, we thank you for this day, for the many blessings you've bestowed on us. Father, thank you so much that we knew Dave Roberts for a short time he was here, but we know he's a lot happier, better off, and just pray that the family will be comfortable and pray just have good thoughts about Dave and that we'll get to see him again. And Lord, we also want to thank you for the law enforcement people that protect our families and our countries. I know that they've put their lives on the line. It's a dangerous job, Lord, but we ask that you help them. You help them, be with them, and keep their families safe. And we just ask that we be better citizens and respect the laws and respect all the other things that need to be respected for our people, Lord. We just thank you for this mighty, good day that you've bestowed on us. And I say, our last advice to Dave Roberts and the family. And again, we thank you for all you do. Thank you, Lord. And I've been asked by the Cherokee Nation to honor and present this Cherokee Nation beautiful blanket. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Here in a few minutes, we're going to give you the opportunity to be able to stand and share about those moments that Dave impacted your life so greatly. You may go right ahead.
We all lost a warrior, a friend for many
amazing. So,
Whether you knew Dave growing up, whether you knew Dave as just a friend, whether you knew Dave through the Tulsa Police Department, through his military service, through ATF, through Cherokee Nation, Dave changed the lives of people that he touched. Being in his presence was something that was life-changing. And so in a few minutes, when we have that opportunity, I once heard somebody say at a service, it's not important what you say, it's important you have something to say. And so today, as you continue to hear those that come, think about what is you would want to share about Dave. I'd like to introduce Ken Miller. Ken?
thank you, Pastor. As the pastor said, my name is Ken Miller, and Dave and I had a friendship, the best friendship, for a little over 50 years. It started in 1971 as a rookie police officer. He was a rookie police officer in the same squad. This class was just ahead of me. I asked Dave one time, I kind of thought I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear him say it. And I said, Dave, when you were flying helicopters in Vietnam, and all of a sudden that jet engine on that Huey kicked off, and the rotation blades quit rotating, and you knew that helicopter was going down, what would you do? Myself, I would be screaming and yelling. But Dave said, I fly the aircraft. And I said, Dave, I don't think you understand. The helicopter's going down. It's going to crash. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's going down. And he said, Ken, you don't understand. Until my face impacted the ground, I'd be doing something to save that aircraft. And I thought, you know, that's the kind of guy I want to fly with. One morning at breakfast, and we had a lot of those breakfasts over 50 plus years, Dave seemed a little down. And I asked him, what's bothering you? He said, well, an upper level supervisor with the agency I'm with spent about 30 minutes chastising, berating, and otherwise impugning me as a resident agent in charge. Not because of the work I did, but because of my opinion of upper level management. With Dave, I have to say, referring to a lot of them as pencil neck geeks. He said he was rather upset with my vocal presentation on how a major crisis was handled by that management. He said, I stood my ground and I will. He said, at the end of this 30-minute tirade, the manager said, well, Mr. Roberts, I'm through. Have you got anything to say? And Dave said, I do. But you don't want to hear it. He said, no, feel free, Mr. Roberts. Let me hear what you have to say. And Dave said, I don't think you want to hear it. And I'll do my best impression of Dave from this point on. I'd like to hear it, Mr. Roberts. What did you have to say to me? All right. Who do I see to complain about you? And I thought, that's Dave. Many of you may know that, or heard the saying that a picture carries 1,000 words. You see a picture up here, those of you close enough, of two young officers, Dave Roberts, myself, and Santa Claus. And you would think, well, that's just two pictures, or that's a picture of two policemen and Santa Claus at Christmas. What's the big deal here? You couldn't be further from the truth. That picture represents a lot more than Santa. Dave and I were assigned to a mall at 41st and Yale on a disturbance call. And when we got there, there was a large group of mothers who were very, very upset, visibly upset. And there was a large group of children who were crying. And there was a mall manager doing everything he could to calm it down, and he couldn't. And over to the corner was a little man who looked exactly like Santa Claus. One of the most beautiful Santa Claus uniforms I've ever seen. His hair and his beard were snow white. And as a little boy, he looked just like I thought Santa Claus would look. But Santa Claus had a secret that not too many people knew about. And that was that Santa Claus was an alcoholic. And Santa had been there all day at the small children sitting on his lap, telling them what they wanted for Christmas. And he had brought with him a little flask, well, a rather large flask. And at every opportunity, Santa would drink from that flask. And of course, by the end of the day, he was pretty well looped. And a situation happened that as a little boy got on his lap and told him what he wanted for Christmas, the little boy then got ready to get down, and Santa said, "No, you get a balloon that I have." And he had a large number of helium balloons, all different colors, right behind him. He reached back and got a yellow balloon and handed it to the little boy. And the little boy said, "No, I don't want the yellow balloon, I want the red one." And Santa said, "No, you're going to get the yellow balloon." And the little boy said, "You don't understand, Santa, I want the red one." And Santa said, "Look, you little SOB." Only he didn't use the abbreviations, he used the real words. And the mothers there immediately lit up like 4th of July. The little boy started crying, and the mothers, if they could have, they would have hung him up by his feet right then and there. The manager just wanted things resolved. And it was obviously that Santa was drunk. So the manager, to quell the little disturbance, said, "I want him arrested." So fast forward to a police car going downtown with 2 police officers in the front, Santa in the back, and a whole bunch of helium balloons all in the back seat. When we got there is when we had a picture taken of us too. We thought it was kind of amusing. And it's one of Dave and I's favorite, and every time we're around someone, we show that picture. After that, we took Dave upstairs. We took the Santa Claus upstairs. We did take Dave upstairs. When we got upstairs, where the prisoners that were incarcerated in the city jail could see us, they began yelling and clapping and just going hysterical. Here the city of Tulsa had gone out of their way to bring Santa Claus to see these prisoners at that time of the year. And they began yelling and screaming and everything. And about that time, they saw us take the handcuffs off of Santa and put him in the position on the wall for a real good search. And the crowded prisoners, it went something like this: "Yay, Santa's here, yeah!" No, Tulsa PD even arrested Santa. Well, that kind of ends most of the story. 2 weeks later, I saw Santa again in his little Christmas uniform at the municipal court. Santa was standing in front of the judge. The judge said, "I see that you were brought here for drinking." He looked around at the people in the audience in that little courtroom and said, "Okay, let's get started." For a number of years, Dave and I, when we would sit and talk and laugh, and sometimes criticize and cry, we always ended it this way: "Love you, brother. I have you this way too." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. I'd like to invite Jerry Morris.
I don't think I can follow Santa Claus.
David wanted somebody from his class, graduating class, Stillwell High School class of 1965, to speak at his memorial service. He had, years ago, he had arranged for Gary Reed to do that. That would have been the perfect thing. But Gary checked out early, and he's in heaven today. So, Gary, I'm subbing for you. You owe me one. We talked about many of Dave's accomplishments and the places he went and the things he did, military and law enforcement and all of that, in positions of authority and distinction. But David never forgot his roots. He never forgot his friends back in that little town of Stillwell, Oklahoma. And he wanted his class, high school class, to be represented at his service. Stillwell is a small town, and growing up there in the 50s and 60s, I think we were one of the most blessed generations of kids there ever was. Stillwell was an idyllic place to grow up in the 50s and early 60s. That was just before our world went crazy. And so, well, many of us who graduated with David in May the 6th of 1965 had started school together in first grade back in August of 1953 and went all the way to school together. So everybody knew everybody pretty well. David wasn't there for the whole time, but he was there for the majority of his school years. And he was a good student. Dave was popular and well liked. He was smart. He was witty. He had a great sense of humor. One of the guys the other day said he thought Dave might have had the highest IQ of anybody in our class. As a high school student, he had a more advanced vocabulary than the typical teenager, and you could see that he was very smart. He was very intelligent, and you can see that he was respected and well liked by his classmates, by the whole high school, in fact, because he was elected president of the student council our senior year in high school. And but when you get together with the guys from that class, and you mention David Roberts, the discussion always goes for sports. Some of the guys said to me the other day they believed that he was the greatest all-round athlete in our class. He was a great basketball player, football player, track, baseball, you name it, he was great at it. And some of you talked about how strong and how tough Dave was, and so you won't be surprised that guys are telling me about a game in Miami, and Dave took a bad hit. He had a concussion, but nobody knew it because he stayed on the field and played the rest of the first half. It wasn't until they went to the locker room and tried to talk to him, they found out they didn't even know where he was. He was completely out of it. But Dave is usually remembered by the guys as the toughest pitcher they ever had to face. He was a Yankees fan, and he had an arm. He was a tremendous baseball pitcher. Several of the guys talked about how they were literally terrified at having to face Dave's pitching. And some guys wouldn't show up when they knew they were going to have to bat against Dave. Because an idea how strong an arm he had, in 8th grade at a track meet, Dave won the softball throw by throwing a softball the entire length of the football field. He had an arm on him, and you didn't want to face that fastball. Well, but I reconnected with Dave near the end of his life. He had lost his vision, and he had severe heart trouble, and he knew he didn't have very long to live. He asked me to say a few words at this service, and we talked for several hours, and he talked to me about all those years in the military and in law enforcement, but as I say, he knew that he didn't have long to live at that point. And Scripture says, the dust will return to the ground from which it came, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Dave knew his body was dying, but he also knew that he has an immortal spirit. And he wanted to talk about that, and he was rightly thinking about that. So we talked for a long time, and he told me in detail about how his family, when he was growing up, were faithful members of the First Baptist Church there in Stillwater. And some of the guys back there, we got at least a dozen members. Hey, if you were in high school with Dave, just raise your hand. You can see, you can see the class of 65 love Dave. But they were faithful members of the Baptist church there. And some of them were talked about being in Sunday school class with him. Dave told me in detail that on a Sunday, when he was 11 years old, he went forward to confess Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. And he said that was a milestone experience in his life. I don't think that's a word to use, but that's what he expressed to me. That it was a very significant experience that he carried with him all of his life and meant a lot to him. And he talked about some of the hard things that he had to do and had to deal with in the law enforcement years and all. Some of the people that he had to deal with. And, there were some things there that, as he knew he was getting ready to check out, there were some things that were troubling to him. And we prayed about that. We prayed together. We talked to the Lord. And 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So we just talked and prayed about those things and sort of updated Dave's commitment there that day. And I'm grateful I had the opportunity to spend that time with him and to renew my friendship with him. I want to say on behalf of his classmates at Stillwell High School, we remember Dave very fondly and with tremendous respect. And we're proud of the things he accomplished in his life. He'll be missed. And we hope to see Dave again on the other side. Our physical bodies are wearing out too. but we have an immortal spirit. So
thank you, Jerry. I'm going to read to you a few remarks from his daughters. First from Jenny. She says, I would say it was the summer of 1984, 1985. Dad was getting ready for work and called for me and my sister Audrey downstairs to have a chat. He told us, I want you girls to mow the front yard today before I get home. Do not, I repeat, do not hit the water meter on the south side of the yard. We thought, yeah, right, okay. Don't hit the water meter, no problem, and went about the morning. When we finally decided to mow, I guess we thought it would be a good idea for the 10-year-old, not the 15-year-old, to mow the lawn and try to get as close to the water meter as we possibly could, you know, just to get that nice, clean cut. Well, I got too close, and before you know it, the mower let out a loud, horrifying screech, and then the mower shut off completely. We flipped it over, and the blade was bent in half. Panic set in. We drug it into the garage, tried to get as many of the neighbor kids over to help as possible. I really have this picture in my mind. But to no avail, the blade wouldn't budge. We tried stepping on it, hammering it, bending it. We tried everything. We finally gave up. Audrey said, why don't you call him and tell him while he's at work? He won't get nearly as mad. Sure, that's a great idea. So I picked up the phone and called the ATF. The secretary patched me through, and the next words I heard were, Roberts. I said, Dad? He said, hey. I said, I was mowing and hit the water meter. It was a very, very long pause. Nothing said. And the next thing was click. He hung up on me. I immediately started bawling and yelling at Audrey that I was going to get in trouble because not only did I hit the water meter, but now I made him mad at work. It was a great memory. Just a snippet into the life of Dave Roberts, my dad, and his two daughters. He had us doing all kinds of manual labor, mowing, raking leaves, hauling ricks of wood. You name it, we girls did it. Dad was all about hard work, and he was about discipline. So I'm glad he was a stickler for the rules and a disciplinarian. I owe everything I am today to him. He was a great man of honor, integrity, love, and generosity. I will miss him greatly, but I know he is in a better place, whole again and pain-free. I love you, Dad, and I will see you later. Audrey puts down a few of her notes. I think that after reading these girls, we could have grown up on the same street. Audrey says, it was hard for me to pick just one or two stories about my dad that described how he was. I decided to share a few of the things that made him the one of a kind from a daughter's point of view. Some of my earliest memories were of me following my dad wherever he went. When he lifted weights in the garage, I was there. When he went jogging, he would take me with him. I would run with him as long as my 4-year-old self could keep up. Then I would just play in the grass while he ran around the trail. As a teenager, he would get up, catch me watching MTV at 4 in the morning on the weekend, and just tell me, go to bed. He had a Halloween mask that looked like a scary bald man. he would put on a hoodie and hide behind the door, scare the crap out of us. When I wanted to take French in high school, he gave me a very serious look and asked me, "How many French people are you going to run into in Oklahoma?" Needless to say, she took Spanish. I have always had an earlier curfew than all of my friends. Being a daughter of an ATF agent, I was never going to get a curfew past 12 midnight. He said nothing good happened after midnight. Everybody's shaking their head. At my 10-year class reunion, I found out from a few of my male classmates that the reason they never asked me out was because they were scared of my dad. I'm just curious how that all came up. We'll have to talk later. Every birthday, he would always take me out for a nice dinner. I would hear the story of how he found out I was born from the Red Cross in his tent in Vietnam. No matter how many times I heard it, I always enjoyed hearing that story every October. He would also tell me that I was the person he knew the longest. I'm going to miss that. In his later years, I had the privilege of taking him to the appointments during the summer while I was off. I always had the 50s and 60s music ready for him to listen to in the car. It amazed me how he knew all the names of all the artists, no matter how old the song was. If the appointment was early, we would go eat breakfast at the Freeway Cafe at 3rd and Trent. He always wanted to go eat Coney's or burgers somewhere for lunch. Then, of course, there were the trips to Dom's to check out another gun purchase. Before we would head home, we would stop at Braum's and get his favorite, a butter pecan shake. I'm going to miss our talks about politics, OU football, and life in general. I admire how strong he was, even to the end. I feel honored that I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, as it should have been just me and my dad. I love you, Dad. Audrey. Life is made of moments that define us. Moments that, from a dad perspective, from a daughter, to co-workers, to those we grew up with. I think of no one that can probably give a better story than his wife. Tony, would you like to come?
If you got any positive energy, send it my way. I'll take it. Over this past month, I've gotten so many phone calls and had so many people who had wonderful stories about Dave that I decided I wanted to get up and tell our story. Before that, when we were planning this memorial, I said that I wanted it to be 3/4 happy and 1/4 sad if it needed to be. Don't look to me to give you anything sad today, because I'm not up for it. Dave and I first met in the spring of '79. He was an ATF agent. I was a rookie on the TPD with 4 months under my belt. Dave had an agent doing a dynamite buy, and they needed a female officer to go in as an extra gun. That shows how few female officers were in the field, because a 4-month rookie is the one that got sent to go. I was so excited, I couldn't wait. 4 months on the department, I was going undercover, working for the feds, buying dynamite. So I pull up to this parking lot, deserted downtown Tulsa, and there was about 5 or 6 guys standing there. The only one, honestly, I remember is Dave. He stood out, as he always did, with his command presence and his muscular build. He had his shirt out untucked so that he could get to his gun and to his other gun and to his knives and to whatever else he needed, because Dave Roberts was always prepared for whatever came down the road. There's always a briefing before a buy, And the only thing I really remember about the briefing is that Dave looked at me very sternly. If you've ever worked around or been his child, I'm sure you've seen the look. And he told me, you are not to say one word during the bye. Well, that ticked me off. You can imagine. In my 4 months on the department, I had several officers come up to my face telling me, you don't belong here, don't back me, blah, 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 blah. So, but I kept my mouth shut because I was going to go buy dynamite unless I ticked off Dave Roberts. I don't remember anything about the dynamite buy. I do know it was successful. I know that we bought it. I know I didn't shoot anyone, no one shot me, nothing exploded, and that I talked the entire time. I do remember the post-debrief very well, because if I thought Dave looked stern before, wait till you disobey his order. So I walk up, we're standing around, just me, a bunch of feds, and an angry Dave Roberts. I thought I told you not to say one word. Well, I said something to the effect of, you're not the boss of me, I'll talk if I want to. And at which point he said, the reason I told you not to speak is because every single word has to be transcribed. He said, well, if you'd have told it to me that way, I would have been quiet. So long story short, we dated. And after 2 days, which I thought had gone very well, I didn't hear from Dave again. And over the next 30 years, we'd see each other quite a bit because we ran in the same circles. They would always come over, talk to me, and I'd always I wonder what happened, but you know, life goes on. 30 years later, I get a phone call, Dave Roberts, and we started dating again. About our second or third date, he asked me if I remembered when we had gone out before, and I said, of course I did. He goes, well, didn't you have fun? I said, yeah, I had a great time. He goes, then why didn't you call me? I don't call men call me. So I'm sure there's a lesson to be learned in there somewhere. Obviously, I haven't learned it. Dave and I married on 11/11/11 at 11:31 in the morning. Dave and I are very patriotic, and we waited for that date. Part of that brought a story to mind. When Dave was growing up, all he ever wanted to be was a soldier. His mom, Sarah, told me about it, but he wanted it so badly that she had sewn him a soldier's outfit. And every morning during the summer, Dave would get up, put on his uniform, grab his BB gun and his faithful dog, whether it was Rocky or Spook, and off he'd go on missions. His favorite mission was to locate some bulls in the pasture. He'd set up a sniper post and would ping the bulls in their backsides. Now, if you've ever seen a bull from the backside, you know what he was shooting at, right? I was horrified. That's animal abuse. How could you shoot a dog or a bull like that? He explained to me that from the distance he was at, the BB, that it didn't hurt them at all. That they would just turn around, curl their lip, and move on. So, our first anniversary, we had just gotten out of the hospital. David had 2 major emergency abdominal surgeries. I got to see Dave on drugs. Something few people, he had to be in the hospital. He was on heavy-duty IV drugs. He saw pure white snakes with blood-red eyes. He'd wake me up all hours of the night with, we're locked out, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. He was very concerned that he was upsetting the nurses, except for when he really upset the nurses. I was in there one morning when the head nurse came in, and she looked kind of like Dave Roberts did at that briefing, and she said, Dave, Mr. Roberts, the nurses are afraid to walk down the hall at night. Why is that? And she looked at me and I just looked down. I don't know anything. What Dave was doing was he had told one of the nurses when she came in, is there something weird about my feet? She goes, no, why? He goes, well, late at night, after when most people are gone, people will walk in, uncover my feet, look at them, giggle and then run out the door, and I hear them go down the hallway. I hear the door open and shut. The nurses were afraid. They believed him. They were afraid to walk in that room. They thought there was some weird foot pervert haunting the halls of St. John's. So even with Dave, never gave up his sense of humor. Shortly after he got out of the hospital, I'd say by a few months, he was well enough, I'd gone out of town on a business trip. Dave called me. We'd barely gotten, the ladies I was traveling with, we'd barely gotten to where we were going. Dave had just been in a fight. I said, what? He was in his mid-60s. There was this crazy neighbor. We lived in the country. There's always a crazy neighbor, well, anywhere you go. But this neighbor had shown up at the house, had banged on the door, tried to enter, and told Dave that he was there to kick it. You said it first. To kick his ass. And Dave said, well, you came to the right place, at which point Dave promptly kicked that guy's butt. And then Dave told him, get off our property right now. The guy started to walk down the gravel drive. Dave goes, nope, that's my property. Get off my property now. Dave loved telling the part of the story where the neighbor got his sensitive parts hung up on the barbed wire fence as he tried to get away from Dave Roberts. In 2013, David lost his vision due to Agent Orange. He went off to the blind rehab in Phoenix, where he got into a little bit of trouble. There was an ATF agent in Arizona that had worked with him, and Dave called him up. The agent came to take Dave out to eat, along with a friend that Dave had made. Well, Dave didn't tell anybody he was going. And when they arrived back about 9:30, the whole VA was in an uproar. They had 2 missing blind veterans. And they got a pretty good chewing out for that. But he would have done it again, I'm sure, but I don't think the ATF agent would go through it again. Dave got home and we adjusted our lifestyle. I learned to drive a little slower, and Dave learned to stop screaming as I was driving. He was allowed to grab the dashboard or press on the emergency brake that he thought he had under his seat, but no yelling at me. In 2018, Parkinson's entered his body, again due to Agent Orange. It took away his ability to walk and eventually to do most basic things. But what it did not give was his sense of humor. Several times after he moved into the Claremore VA, I'd get a call from the nursing staff because he had told them something so outlandish that they couldn't believe it was true. But if you knew Dave Roberts, the more outlandish the story was, the more convincing his poker face was. They finally just learned to just kind of roll with the punches with Dave. In this last year, we hit 10 years it was our 10th anniversary, and Dave wanted a vow renewal, which kind of surprised me a little bit. Men don't usually think of that, but he did all the planning, what he wanted, how he wanted it to be. I did the execution and the setup. We had a wonderful time. He enjoyed having everyone around. He really enjoyed, you'll see a few pictures of it. He really enjoyed it. Around probably about 6 months before our wedding renewal, Dave had started talking to me about death. And every time he would bring it up, I'd say, do you feel like you're dying? And he 2 or 3 times told me, not yet. Well, February 14th of this year, Dave developed bacterial pneumonia and was admitted to the hospital. And after a few days, I realized that Dave was dying. He had begun the active dying process. He was sleeping most of the time, except when he'd wake up for me to hand feed him sumo oranges or anything else. I made the pulse ox machine stand into a snack bar. Anything Dave wanted, I took to him to eat. But he was asleep. He woke up. Every time he'd wake up, he'd talk with me. But he woke up once and he said, I'm fairly confident. I said, okay, what up? He goes, I'm dying. I said, Dave, yes, you are dying. The next time he woke up, he asked me for something. Did anybody figure out what it might have been? He wanted me to go buy him another gun. And I said, of course I will. What kind do you want? They fell asleep before I found out what it was, so he never got his last pound. Right now, I'm so happy for Dave, and I'm heartbroken for us. But what he went through was not right, and I'm so grateful that he's walking and singing, and he's with his loved ones, and I know I'll see him again. And thank you all for coming.
We want to give you an opportunity to be able to share any stories that you might have about you and Dave at this moment. Yes, sir.
I'm trying not to look at Kyle. Typically, 5th and 6th grade, we would make each other laugh in class, and one of us would sit on the hallway. So I look at him today. It's an honor to be standing here today, and it's easy to look around this room and see what an absolute impact Dave had on so many lives. I'm fortunate to say that he impacted mine positively in so many ways. Kyle and I have been best friends for 35 years now at least. We lived in the same neighborhood together, played baseball and basketball together. So growing up, there aren't a lot of nights that I didn't spend at Kyle's. Summers, playing home run derby out in the front yard. Many of you here today remember Dave for his service to our country, his time in the Army with the Tulsa Police Department, ATF, or the Marshal Service. While I had the privilege of working for Dave after graduation at CND up until he retired, my memories go a little further back that I want to share with you guys today. I remember him first as a coach, and although I grew up in a home with my father, I always considered Dave a father figure, second dad, if you will. The morning after Dave passed, Kyle and I were on the phone with each other and started talking about memories we had of his dad. He asked me if I'd write a few down on paper to share, and I ended up spending the next hour or so writing 3 full pages of things without much thinking at all. I won't share them all with you today, but I would like to share a couple of funny memories I have with Dave and the lessons learned from those memories. There was never just a moment with Dave, there was always a lesson to be learned. My first memory of Dave was always thinking he was larger than life. He was Superman. He was invincible. I recall watching him in bench press in the garage where he had this huge poster of Sergeant Slaughter hanging on the wall. There was no music, there was no talking, just Dave and what seemed to me at that time to be about 1,000 pounds on that barbell. Of course, we weren't actually allowed in the garage while Dave was lifting. We talked too much and we horseplayed too much. But there was one time that Dave needed us in that garage with him. Kyle and I were upstairs playing Sega, and Dave was in the garage lifting. You could hear the weights clanging. His sister yelled from downstairs, "Hey Kyle, Dad's yelling for you." We didn't pay much attention to it. We kept playing the game. His sister then yelled again, "Kyle, he's yelling pretty loud. He needs you outside." So we run outside, and he had at least 500 pounds buried on his chest. He was out there by himself, lifting weights, and he had it buried on him. Kyle and I, at the age of, maybe 11 or 12, way too light in the shorts to be lifting that kind of weight off of him, stood on each side of the barbell, and it went nowhere. So he said, "Just start peeling the damn things off there, would you?" So we start taking the plates off as fast as we can. He gets it back up there and he says, "Is there anything else that you need from us?" He said, "No, just get your asses back inside now." So we did. He typically followed up his workouts with a run. We would get back, we'd ask him how far he ran. His response was always, "Until I got tired and then I ran some more." As a player of his then, and having kids of my own now in competitive sports, I think it's safe to say that Dave's coaching tactics wouldn't necessarily fly in the world we live in today. He didn't cuss at us. In fact, aside from a few clipboards or two hitting the ground or a single hand clap that could be heard 2 counties away, I can only recall a few times where he had to raise his voice. And if you remember the stature of Dave in the early 90s, you know he didn't have to. Colin, you talked about the look. I know there's 2 or 3 rows of kids right there that got that look a few times. They remember it quite well. Let's just say the mission was clearly presented to each of us and we understood it well. There were no shortcuts, there were no whining, no excuses, no participation trophies. He taught us if you wanted something in life, you had to go and take it because it wouldn't just be handed to you. He taught us how to work hard for what we wanted and how to be mentally and physically stronger than your opponent. He held high expectations of each one of us, but he also loved us as if we were his own. Whether you played for the Bears, the Bulls, the Giants, or the Lookouts, if you needed a glove, he'd get you one. If you needed a bat or cleats, you'd have a pair with no questions asked. And if you needed to know where the Bulls' 8-under machine pitch team was any summer evening, you could find us running laps around the field singing cadence. I love my coach. The heat is my friend. And one of my favorites, we are the Bulls, the mighty, mighty Bulls. Did I mention we were 8 years old? We typically had to run extra laps because Odell could never keep a straight face when we were running. He asked him to leave cadence a few times, but that didn't go too well. To end basketball practices, we'd do knuckle push-ups on the hardwood floor. He would walk up and down the floor asking, do you love me? Do you love your coach? I can tell you at the time we did not love him. But synchronized and as loud and proud as we could say it, our answer was always, sir, yes, sir. He taught us to respect the flag. Before each practice, we'd line up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, where the church next to our practice field flew a huge American flag. Our team hats, just like the American flag, were never allowed to touch the ground and were never to be worn backwards. He taught us humility. For all the years we played basketball, we only ever lost 1 game. Now, Dave never confirmed this with anybody, but I have my theories on how that loss came to be, and I'd be willing to wager that Dave set it up knowing exactly what that outcome was. We had played a game earlier in the day, and we had, annihilated this team pretty well. Dave tells us after the game, hey, I got another game scheduled for you guys later that's not on the schedule. It's a team you've never seen, someone you've never played. So us, 12-year-old cocky kids who hadn't lost a game, walked in this gym in Tulsa. And if there were a record player in that gym, you would have heard it screech to a stop. I still believe today that the men on the other side of the court drove themselves to that basketball game. These men proceeded to give us the butt kicking of our lives. We fought, we never gave up, but we lost big time. Dave gathered us up after the game, told us he was proud for the way we fought, but that we always needed to remain humble. He taught us to fight for what we believed in. Don't start it, but you damn sure better finish it. One summer evening, Kyle and I were across the street playing basketball, and some older neighborhood kids had come over and joined us, and as street basketball typically goes, it started getting a little bit rough. And I was probably this height when I was 12 years old, and I like to get into fights a little bit. So me and one other kid had started to kind of hook it up. And the fight ensued, punches were being thrown, we were rolling around the grass, and the next thing I hear is, hey, Brandon, and fear took over my body. I was no longer afraid of the situation I was in, I was afraid of what I was about to get into. I raise up and I say, yes, sir, and he said, whenever you get finished over there, these burgers are almost done on the grill. So the fight ended, we go inside and start eating, and Dave says, we really kicked that kid's ass over there, didn't you? I said, well, I hope so. And he goes, you'll never be able to take me. Speaking of cheeseburgers, You ever met someone who loved Goldies as much as Dave Roberts? I must have eaten 10,000 bacon double cheeseburgers over the years, always 2 at a time. Typically followed that up with an Ovaltine shake or a malt from Braun's. I bet Dave single-handedly kept Goldies and Burger King open with the amount of cheeseburgers he had to eat over the years. And I know there's a handful of guys in the room today, Odell Moot, Casey Jones. You guys have had your fair share of burgers provided by Dave. No matter what we were doing, you could always guarantee he was going to ask on the way home if we wanted a cheeseburger. I say ask, it was more of a, hey, we're stopping for cheeseburgers. And I can't recall one meal I ever had with Dave as a child or even as an adult where I ever actually got to look at a menu. He always ordered for me, and whatever he thought I needed, it was always the right answer. Strength, respect, humility, not just lessons Dave instilled in us as 9-year-old ball players, but to prepare us for life well after we hung up the cleats. All memories I will forever cherish and hold closely to my heart as long as I live. Thank you, Dave, for being a mentor, a friend, a father figure, and forever instilling in me a love for double cheeseburgers and chocolate malts.
Thank you so much. Anyone else like to share? I know over the next days, weeks, months, years to come, people are going to continue to think of those stories that we've heard already today. Reach out to the family through a text, a phone call, bumping into them at their next Goldie stop or Whataburger stop or wherever that would be. Dave Roberts cannot be replaced. His memory, however, can be honored. The words that his wife wrote. And we are all heartbroken, and we are here today to honor a man who taught us what it was like to be young men and young women and how to work hard. In 2010, Dave was honored with the Cherokee Nation Citizen of the Year. As we said earlier, and you're right, I did say it first, he was a big badass. But he was a softie, and he was a man with a heart. He was a man that was in charge. And if he was there, he was in charge. And you knew it. Because Dave loved his family. He loved his friends. Dave was a man who was, as we've heard numerous times today, strong, loyal, funny. Very funny. That dry sense of humor. But he was honest. He was fair. No one more dedicated, and no one more generous. See, Dave was that sentimental man as well. He loved the holidays with his family. They always described him as the best, the greatest gift giver. See, Dave had some loves in his life. He loved guns. I mean, really loved guns. He was probably the only man who could watch a butter commercial and look at his wife and say, I think we need to go get another gun. He loved baseball, the Yankees. He loved his pets. He loved the Oklahoma Sooners. He loved his country. Being a helicopter pilot with 2 tours in Vietnam. Something he knew inside and out. He served in the Oklahoma National Guard, where they called him Mr. Roberts. We heard about how he served 7 years in the TPD, how he served over 20 years at the ATF, I was able to serve through the Oklahoma City bombing and the siege at Waco. We heard how he served as the Cherokee Marshal for 4 years, where he served as the Vice President of Security and Surveillance and Loss Prevention. You see, he loved to go out, and as we just heard, he would even order for you. And it was something, whether you knew it or not, you were going to like it. He loved to go out. He loved to go to the Bluestone, Whataburger, Speedway Cafe, Bill's, as you just heard, Burger King, Brahms, and Golden's. He loved bacon, double meat, and he loved a steak. See, these are things in life that when we hear, from this moment forth, we will think of Dave. We will think the next time we have a cheeseburger and a chocolate malt. We will remember the influence he had in our life the next time we drive by a Whataburger. Dave would have stopped. He would have gotten bacon on it. But he loved beans and cornbread. See, Dave was a man that wasn't about the fancy foods. He was about how to keep it simple. Dave spent his life teaching. He spent his life with people. See, Dave was successful because of the way he was with people. There are a few people in our lives that we look at that can describe that more than Dave Roberts. Because Dave was someone that no matter what the situation, he taught us something. Even if it was you didn't call after 2 dates. You see, Dave, he loved to coach Little League baseball and basketball, as you heard. And apparently, I coach sports. I'm going to take some of that and see if I can do some of those hard knuckles. I think what I took from that was, do you love your coach? I'm going to try that on Monday night. But see, more importantly than winning and losing, what Dave wanted most from those young men was to teach them how to be young men. See, not too often do you find a coach that cares more about what they do off the court than he did. It's about how do we teach you to grow up to be the man you're supposed to be. We're going to miss his presence. We're going to miss just him being there and that larger than life that he was. We'll miss his friendship. And Lord knows we'll miss his jokes. We'll miss the way he could only tell a story. The way it captivated you. And you would find yourself asking, is he serious? We will miss the way people were drawn to him. I believe that Dave had a few things that he would want us to know today. The first is this, is that his life was about honesty, generosity, kindness, strength, and humility. These are a few words that describe the cornerstone of what he built his life upon. It is an honor and a privilege to stand here before you today, as I get to speak at services and share the life celebration of so many. I'm asked this question: where do we go from here? What do we do? We have a void inside. And friends, where we go is we live a life that honors Dave. We live a life that makes the Hawk proud of us. That Grandpa Dave would look at and say, well done. Because of how we take our honest approach to life. The way we are generous, kind. The way we continue to build strength. And the way we show humility. The second, I believe he would say to us is, take responsibility for your actions. If you're going to talk, be prepared to pay the price. See, he was someone, again, when he was in charge, he was there, you all knew it. And Dave was someone who taught us how to take responsibility for who you are, even if you've been the lawnmower lately. And the last, that there was no right or wrong. There was right and there was wrong. There was never a gray area in the middle for Dave. In our life today, I hear people trying to justify things all the time. But it was men like Dave Roberts that taught us right is right and wrong is wrong. May we leave those around us, our children, the next generation. May we teach them the principles of Dave. May we teach them how to give, how to be honest, how to show kindness, how to let humility surround us. Friends, today we've gathered because Dave meant something to us. Dave cannot be replaced, but may we honor him by how we live our life from this moment forward. Enjoy.
Don't wait, you just might miss your baby's growing reminded, turning into moms and dads. Next thing you know, you better have a 50 years of there and then. And you pray God takes you instead. Trust me, friend, 100 years goes faster than you think. Don't wait. I was glued to my TV, looking like you looked at me, said, let's start putting first things first. 'Cause when the hourglass runs out of sand, you can't rip it over and start again. Take every breath God gives you for one.
Ship in the harbor will always stay safe, tied up to a dock, and why it was made. Graves waiting through the sand, it's wood on the way, head to the great unknown. And 102 they left the spoils, but the price of the barrel ain't worth the oil when the season is over. Steer it towards on through the deeps of someplace to go. And I need you now. Go up, go ahead, get loud. Like thunder, the storm's coming down. In my lighthouse, you save my soul.
As we prepare to continue to honor Dave here in a moment, as the military begins their tribute, there will be loud gunshots to prepare you. There are 31,101 verses in Scripture, and I believe that no verses talk about Grandpa Dave's life more than these. Found in the book of Psalm, chapter 82. It says, defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. today, thank you for celebrating Dave's life here. Thank you for the love, the friendship, and the lifetime of memories that you have shared and that you hold in your heart. Please remain seated until you are dismissed as this concludes today.
Only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. Only imagine. Only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, one will my heart feel. Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in all of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? To my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Only imagine when that day comes, when I find myself standing in the sun. Only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. Only imagine. Only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in all of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? To my knees will I fall? Will I sing? Will I sing? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only
This is what we get for sitting in the back row.
I guess we could, they never know.
Yes, I do have
Sir, good to see you.
That's how he meant.
Good to see you, Mike.
Stand in. Thank you. Stand in.
They seem to be.
Did you see? He looked taller. That's taller. I mean, yeah. It's the bald head.
You must be.
Get rid of that hair. You got taller.
I mean, like 3 inches taller than he used to be.
Now you got to grow some facial hair because it looks like your shoulder is a little bubble.
My wife says I look like an arm. I tried it.
He did. He called me and told me he did. He called me and told me.
Did he?
He'd had a
I've been thinking about calling him. I just didn't want to tell anybody I was going to call him.
Yeah. No, no. Hey, Bob. How are you? Bob. Come on, camera. See.
Still on.
Hmm?
Still on.
There it is.
Back in here. Let me go.
Come on, guys. I have about 15 members of the class of 65. We're going to take a picture.
You betcha.
Oh, go ahead.
Great
Yeah.
job today, sir.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Had you known him in high school, you wouldn't think he'd been done worse.
I have the all-time record for getting the most passes.
Still?
Still will.
Well, nobody gets
Probably
them anymore.
after you got done, they outlawed it.
Yeah, probably.